Jennifer Egan is a woman who can write her own ticket. The Brooklyn-based author was awarded a Pulitzer Prize in 2011 for her book, A Visit from the Goon Squad. Her latest novel, Manhattan Beach, set largely in the Brooklyn Navy Yard of the late 1930s, is the story of a young woman's path to becoming the Yard's first female diver. Set against the criminal underworld of New York City and the larger world at war. A bestseller, it's garnering universal praise and making Best Book of the Year lists.
I've been walking around with this book, and it's like if I was a single person or not inclined to fidelity, this thing is like the conversation starter everywhere in
almost
my
building. Almost as good as having a dog, right?
It is, because people know you're not so dumb. You're reading a Jennifer Egan book and everyone wants to talk about this thing. So how are you feeling about the reception that it's gotten?
I feel incredibly relieved and kind of incredulous. I can't even believe I published another book.
Yeah.
I truly thought, because I can't overemphasize how little faith I had in this project about 2 years in.
Yeah.
And the reason I didn't quit is that the research itself still felt really alive and vital to me. And I thought, if I can read a book called How to Abandon Ship on the elliptical machine at Crunch Gym, if this feels like essential, exciting reading for me, there has to be a reason. I'm still in it.
This book is at a moment when the world conspired to change the lot of women. And right now we're at a moment where a lot of things are happening that may shift for a sea change for women. What do you think about those parallels?
It's kind of fascinating because, women were invited, or rather, begged, would maybe be a better word, to enter into the world of industry, heavy industry in America, because the men were not here and there were simply not enough hands to do those jobs. So the whole Rosie the Riveter campaign was about persuading women that it was a good idea to do this work they had been told all their lives they could never do. But, for example, at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, there were all kinds of protections in place to make sure that, bad situations didn't arise from having men and women together. For example, they weren't allowed to go on ships for, I think, at least a year and a half. And they weren't allowed to go on ships because the idea was men and women in close quarters. This is a bad idea. Ships are very tight, compressed spaces. But what they were acknowledging was, or at least seemed to be suggesting, was that men in particular might not be able to control themselves in this work environment with other women. And you'd say, well, that's absolutely crazy. How could anyone think such a thing?
Fast forward to today.
Some women talked about open hostility, like men yelling, go back to the kitchen, usually as a group, yelling at women as a group. But on the whole, they spoke of the respect with which they were treated, and I think to some degree that respect was sort of required. I mean, it wasn't appropriate for a woman to even be really alone with a man, except under certain circumstances. So I feel like there were all these cultural protections, restrictions, which were annoying, but they served a purpose, and now we have none of that, and yet the kind of crazy aggressive behavior that those things were supposed to be inhibiting seems to actually be going on.
So did you know what the end was when you started? Do you hear voices?
Not at all.
What's your process?
My process is I start with a strong sense of time and place. In the case of this book, that had evolved from New York during World War II, which is pretty general, into waterfront, Navy Yard, deep sea diving. I knew all of those things would be involved, and I had done some kind of experiential research into all of those worlds. I had interviewed a lot of people.
You got the kit on.
I had worn the dress, the 200-pound dress. So I had done some stuff, but I had also been publishing other books. I mean, when I wore the dress, that was 2009. I hadn't even published Goon Squad yet.
Okay. So back in 2009, you put on this 200-pound dress. Do you go home and make a note about that? How do you keep those different rooms in your brain inhabited so you can come back and write something so rich years later.
I barely remembered what it felt like to wear the dress by 2012 when I started writing. I certainly had never really known what it was like to dive, even though I had interviewed a lot of people, including a World War II Army diver, whom I met in 2009, and thank goodness, because he passed away, I think before the end of that year, although he was in perfect health when we spoke. So I had this kind of store of experiential research. I had been present for and or conducted a lot of interviews, which was helpful because those voices were sort of in my head, and I also had notes of all of it. When I sat down to write, I discovered that all of that amounted to basically zero. I had no fucking idea what I was talking about. Like, I couldn't do a thing.
Oh, that just makes me hate you, because 400 pages later, you wrote a damn good book. Where did it come from?
I immediately began researching and researched the entire way through.
This place was so specific to the book and such a character. I wonder how you balanced all the people who inhabited the Navy Yard, because I'm thinking of the guys at the gate, I'm thinking of the lines, I'm thinking of the spaghetti for lunch, and I'm thinking of the bike rider on the dock and what it meant for her to fall down, and the guys, and this place you imbued it with such life.
I felt like I got imbued with all that life, literally all from research. Every single thing you just mentioned has an actual real life corollary coming from my research. The Ship Worker, which was the publication, the newspaper that was produced by the Navy Yard, was incredibly helpful because, like any local newspaper, it got incredibly granular. I mean, it was literally, I think there was literally like a lost and found, there was a lost and found section. It included things like dentures. I mean, these little details were so amazing. I had maps of the Navy Yard at different points taped to the walls of my office. Several people mentioned the smell of chocolate. And then when I was looking at photos of the Navy Yard in the National Archives, lo and behold, on Flushing Avenue, a glimpse of a chocolate factory. So it began to create a sort of mesh of knowledge and experience that felt like my own enough that I could really draw on it. No one is as interested in the Brooklyn Navy Yard as I am and as people here are. I really do want to geek out about this research, and that's actually a serious danger as a fiction writer, because geeking out, what that really means is giving the reader more than they need to know, and that's a drag. And some reviews have said that I have done that, and I'm not surprised. I hope it's not true, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're right, because it's not, I used to think when I would read people geeking out, oh, they're showing off. But it actually isn't. It doesn't come from that. It comes from love.
Fully aware of our geek status, we ventured out to the Navy Yard's dry dock, where the USS Missouri, America's last commissioned battleship, was launched in 1944.
This whole place is ready for its second act, and there's going to be a new generation of industry and innovation that happens in the Navy Yard. I just want you to give respect to the folks who came here, who we are losing every day.
I know.
Who really informed the way this story happened.
I feel so lucky to have had a chance to talk with them and meet them, and I'm so glad that they were willing to have their stories commemorated and really be part of the fabric of this place. I also feel like one thing I got to witness that was exciting was the Navy Yard taking charge of its own history and finding a way to sort of present that history and also give the public a portal through which to experience it, and literally a portal into the yard. There are amazing tours of the yard now that none of that existed when I first started coming here. You know, it's a moving, changing environment, and it was really a joy to get involved in really the last generation of people who have living memory of this time during the war. And I'm glad that I was able to help a little bit with capturing their stories.